thank you, Eric, for coming to talk to us today. It's
Not a
great that
problem.
you could take some time out of your day to come and visit us and talk about your book, The New Zealand Weather Guide, which you bought today, so that's great. Firstly, what was your inspiration in writing the book?
I think it started when I was in a flat with about 7 other people, and I didn't think they'd be interested in the weather, and one day someone asked me about it, and I ended up spending about an hour explaining it, moving the salt and pepper shakers around and the butter and all the rest of it, explaining how cold fronts work and all the rest of it. So they got interested, and I was surprised, but it dawned on me then that a lot of people like talking about the weather, and that was kind of the beginning. And then I got the opportunity to write for a magazine called New Zealand Geographic, and I've been writing for them for 20 years. And once I'd 5 years of that under my belt, it sort of seemed a logical step to then have a look at a book. And one of my, by then ex-flatmates was in publishing, so that made it easy to kind of go down that road. Mm-hmm. And one thing led to another. It took longer than I thought, it took more work than I thought. Mm-hmm. But I like explaining stuff like that to people, and they seem to like listening to my explanations.
So do you talk salt and pepper in the book?
Not anymore, I've moved on.
Moved on.
What it is, of course, once you've got diagrams and you can show weather maps, you don't need the salt and pepper.
Right.
And weather maps are the sort of basic tool to wave under people's noses, because weather maps are in the newspapers, they're on TV, so people are used to seeing them, so you can give them an idea. If this is the sort of weather map you've got at the moment, then these are the possibilities for the next day or two, and you don't have to worry about X, but you might have to worry about Y. And then the sort of fine detail of the forecast pans out as you get closer to the event.
Mm. So what do you think are the most important meteorological terms a layperson should learn and understand?
I think one of the things that gives us the worst weather is the deep depressions that come out of the tropics, in particular tropical cyclones. Once they come towards New Zealand, they change their character and they're no longer properly termed tropical cyclones. But they're the most destructive, and things that have happened in my lifetime have been the Wahine storm, that was a case. Also Cyclone Bowler, that did a terrific amount of damage in terms of flooding to Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, but also wind damage to many other parts of the North Island. What you often find with a big storm like that is the province that gets all the rain is not usually the province that gets the worst of the wind. So you have this interesting mixture where one province is in line for one sort of disaster and another province gets a different disaster. But there's lots of ins and outs, and one of the things I like pointing out to people is you can have a thing like a flood when there's no rain in the place where you live, because in the South Island you can have very heavy rain in the Alps, and the rivers that come down to the coast of Canterbury can go into flood when all you've had is either high cloud or blue sky. And that happened last month. So for people who hadn't grown up in that area, that would be a surprise. You wouldn't expect a flood if you hadn't had rain on top of your head. So each different part of the country's got a sort of different set of hazards that they have to watch out for. And one of the ones that can take some people by surprise is, with very deep depressions, you often raise the sea level. And then when you've got strong winds as well, that can drive the sea up onto the land. And if it coincides with the spring high tide, then you have coastal erosion. You can have the sea coming over the road or taking some of the land away. So there's a whole raft of hazards that vary from storm to storm.
So you would typically find that when the weather is presented, say, on the news in the evening, they talk about, like you said, the major weather pattern that's happening in one province, but not necessarily the flow-on effect, is it?
They'll take the lead from what we feed them. So if it's an event where we've got severe weather warnings, either for damaging winds or flooding or heavy snow, they will usually emphasise that first. And usually when that happens, it'll be 3 or 4 provinces bearing the brunt of it, and the rest of the country not so much. So it's one of those things where you've also got the situation where you might be the next province down the road from the place getting worse hit. But if there's a small change in the direction of the movement of the low centre, then your province gets included as well. So there's that sort of thing where you're close to where the danger is, but you're not the first on the list to get hit. But then if there's a small change, you might be included.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, thinking about incident management teams, and if they are currently managing an emergency of some sort, what is it, the things that they really need to be looking out for their people that are perhaps out in the field helping, say, after an earthquake or something? I guess it's probably along those lines of what's happening in that province. Is it going to affect where they're working? And, you know, we're talking about getting information to our people out in the field,
right.
And using the weather, I guess, as another resource to make sure they're well prepared. Yeah.
A big earthquake's a good example because there's quite a reasonable chance that the next time we have one of those, there may well be some very bad weather, if not on the day itself, then a short time after. And so you might suddenly find that you're at risk of a lot of landslips from heavy rain, where normally you wouldn't have been, but if you've had an earthquake shaking things up. And if you've already got infrastructure badly damaged by an earthquake, then it might only need an ordinary amount of rain, rather than a heavy rainfall warning, to cause further damage to roads or rail links. So often you're dealing with a combination of things. One thing's gone wrong and it's causing you trouble, and then the weather comes along and makes it a bit worse. So you can have a sort of interesting mixture of things that may not be bad enough to have a warning, but can still cause you trouble. So keeping an eye on what the weather's doing is always beneficial.
And how often is the forecast actually updated?
Some of the forecasts are monitored constantly so that they could be updated at any moment if something were to change. Generally every few hours. One of the things that happens with weather forecasts is the first bit that you were talking about happens and is gone. So you often want to take that bit out of the text so that you're not going on about something that was going to happen this morning when it's already lunchtime. So there's just an ordinary need to keep editing out the bits that have already taken place. That's one thing. And then on some occasions you may find that as the storm gets closer you realise it's worse than you had originally suspected. That was certainly true when I first started, when one or two ship reports could make all the difference. Nowadays we've got such wonderful satellite equipment measuring not just the clouds but also the winds in a storm and the water content at different levels in the atmosphere. We don't get the surprises that we did when I first started out. But nonetheless you need to keep an eye on it just because things can sometimes surprise you.